Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Erica, and I coordinate the Institutional Grammar Research Initiative, also known as the IGRI. Our IGRI research seminars feature scholars from around the world who use the institutional grammar to examine the origins, structure, and implications of institutional design. So today I am very excited to introduce our guest speaker, Carlos. Carlos is a PhD student studying economics at the European University Viadrina in Germany. He specializes in entrepreneurship with a focus on ecosystems and community building. He will present on his research entitled Expanding the Comprehension of Governance in Entrepreneurial Ecosystems. So thanks so much for presenting, Carlos. I will turn things over to you.
And thank you very much again, Erika, for the invitation, and well, everybody also for the interest to join and participate in this session. I will share here my screen now, so you can see the slides, hopefully. I hope yes. And perfect. Okay, so let's begin. So as Erika mentioned in the introduction, I am a PhD student in topics in entrepreneurship and economics from the European University Viadrina, from a research laboratory called Entrepreneurship Research Lab, the ER Lab, and that's based in Germany, by the way. So this is a study case that I decided to do for apply institutional grammar in a novel way to an entrepreneurial ecosystems. I will introduce some of the concepts for the ones that are not familiar with it. And therefore, the research that I'm presenting today has this title of Expanding the Comprehension of Governance in Entrepreneurial Ecosystems, an analysis of the Heilbronn ecosystem using institutional grammar. Heilbronn is a city, by the way, in Baden-Württemberg, which is a region in the southwest of Germany, close to the border with France. So when we talk about, why do we talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems and governance, and why these topics matters? So entrepreneurial ecosystems, first, what are they? They are dynamic networks of entrepreneurs, institutions, and resources fostering innovation and new venture creation. They are relevant because they are key drivers of innovation and economic growth. As economists, I believe that that's very important for the regions and for the development of the economies, the regions, and the countries. But an element also in these ecosystems is the governance of them. And by governance approach, we will define it as a set of formal and informal rules that shapes behaviors and interactions. This is basically the approach of Douglas North. And why this is relevant? Because rules and governance shapes economic outcomes. That's said by Robinson and Acemoglu, which they are Nobel Prizes in economics some years ago. So the research gap that I am trying to answer with this research is, despite the growing research on entrepreneurial ecosystems, how institutions shapes behavior and economic performance remains unexplored. Therefore, the need to study in more detail how these institutions, which are these rules, formal and informal, behave or affect the behavior for the actors. And therefore, the research questions that I decided to investigate is what is the governance approach of the entrepreneurial ecosystems in this study case of Heilbronn, and how should it be developed to enhance productive interactions, which is a concept that I introduced also in the paper, defined as exchanges that generate collaboration, knowledge sharing, and innovation. So in order to understand this topic, I would like to introduce you briefly to models that will help us to understand better how the ecosystems works, how the ecosystems behave. And the first model is the model of Daniel Eisenberg that present the actors on the ecosystems. And this was the first idea that came to my mind when I started actually to think in institutional grammar as a potential approach, because in institutional grammar, we have some sort of actors that we call them attributes in regulative statements, and we call them entities in constitutive statements. So I thought maybe they might be also able to be tracked in the formal and informal rules considering this approach. So Daniel Eisenberg says these networks, they are composed from financial actors. You might think in banks but also investors, venture capitalists that they are in the model. But you have also the government, which is the policymakers and public leaders. So either president, governors, mayors, councils, they also represent somehow important actors for the ecosystem. Corporations, which are usually private companies, big corporations, that they are able to move and influence very much the ecosystem. But you have also the roles of the universities, the educator sectors, but also the research institutes that you have in the regions, plus other facilities that might also contribute to develop human capital, and support organizations that in the case of ecosystems and economics, for entrepreneurship, you might find accelerators, incubators, innovation hubs, etc. That they are also very relevant for support the actors in the ecosystem. So with an idea of these actors, because you will see them in a moment in the analysis of the database as entities and attributes, Eric Stam also presented how this composition, so how these actors interact in different domains. So he said within the entrepreneurial ecosystems, there are like two big groups: the institutional arrangements, and this is another topic that we are familiar in institutional grammar. And therefore I thought, okay, this seems to be also in the line with the institutional grammar, because I can do an analysis of formal institutions, a little bit of culture, and also how these networks interact. But also there are other components that he called it resource endowments, and then you can find the physical infrastructure, demand, intermediaries, talents, knowledge, leadership, and finance. In my research, I basically added something to this model, and I said these resource endowments and institutional arrangements are like the base, and then you can develop through them productive interactions that they will elevate or create as a result, as an output, productive entrepreneurship, and at the end, economic growth, which is of course one of the objectives in the economy. How to test models of governance in entrepreneurial ecosystems. So I basically track different models of governance for different kind of organizations and different kinds of economic structures and social structures, and I come up to these two that I was thinking I'm thinking they are like the most closest ones to entrepreneurial ecosystems, and are polycentricity or polycentric governance, which some of you are very familiar, or at least somehow familiar, which is multiple autonomous actors with shared coordination mechanisms, but also network governance, which basically has three different types of governance, which is shared governance, when there is a coordination shared by all the actors. So it's basically spread the responsibilities of the ecosystem. Or there is a lead organization, one actor has a lot of responsibilities and has a lot of roles within the ecosystem in this case, and also the network admin organization, which is basically one separate unit that manages the network. So to more or less have an idea, what I was doing with the dataset was trying to get some of the characteristics of these governance models and see if they, with the grammar, if they match to some of these models and types of governance. And at the end, I will show you what did I find. So I more or less introduce how I thought about the institutional grammar during the process. This is the part that you might be very familiar, and is how the institutional grammar works. So you might probably know all of this, but just for the record, institutional grammar is a logic syntactic. And the screen here, in which institutional statements can be represented and compared. We know that, and we know that institutional grammar has two different components or types of statements, that are regulative statements and constitutive statements. The regulative that prescribe, permit, and prohibited action, and the constitutive that define entities, roles, and relational structures. Understanding rule structures is key to analyzing governance. Therefore, all of this analysis, I hope, is making somehow sense. So these two slides, they basically explain the logics of institutional grammar. I think maybe I can skip them very briefly, but just to say here, I am using from the different institutional grammar levels that we have and types that we have, because we have the first and the second version. And in them we have different, especially in the second one, we have the core level, the logical. I decided to use the core level since I don't need too much semantics analysis for this case. And that's enough for my data set. So we have the components of the regulative in the core level and the components of the constitutive in the core level as well. But a part of that, and also as a recommendation from one of our colleagues in the institutional grammar group, which is Professor Irene Perez Ibarra, she advised me, why don't you incorporate action situations and rule typology, since they might also help you to track the governance approach. And I decided to give it a try as well. So I added a part of the classifications of components for regulative and constitutive, the part of analysis of rules typologies. This is also something that you might be familiar, and these action situations and rules typologies are very important, especially in this topic, since it's very, very broad. So entrepreneurial ecosystems, as you have perceived, it might be actually kind of a city development model, and then you have a lot of components, therefore a lot of rules. So it's important to constrain the specs of the research, otherwise it's impossible to apply the grammar to this area of knowledge. And therefore the action situations that I selected is rules structuring productive interactions in entrepreneurial ecosystems. And as I presented to you, we have different participants here, the entrepreneurs, the startups and founders. We have also mentors that they were also there in the chart, investors or the financial sector, which are also venture capitalists, accelerators and incubators. They are part of the support organizations, academic institutions from the education, and the government was also there presented. And this is something that I developed with the idea of the action situations, and I try to track the positions that they play, the actions that they do, the outcomes that usually they generate, the information that we find there, how kind of control do we have, and costs and benefits, to have a more or less a bit of an idea. And with this, this helped me also to have an idea where to look in the data set, because that was one of the most challenging things. I'm gonna come to the data set now. So the first thing that I want to say is when I started to do the project, I thought maybe I can find a policy that will give me an idea of how is the ecosystem work, and this policy maybe can establish some rules, formal, that will establish roles, will establish responsibilities, enforcement, constraints within the ecosystem, and that's not what I found, since it's a relatively new ecosystem, and therefore the first challenge appeared, and it was like, how can I track all of this? Then we had to do a more dense and more complicated way to look at it, and it was, let's go for the interviews, and then let's ask the people, let's go to the newspapers and see what the media says. Let's go to videos to see what can we find in audiovisual material. Let's go to talks that they were in the city that were very prominent, and also very important for me, the website, since at least I can find some written documents there, and these written documents will give me some idea. So from all of this, I track around 42 sources, and from them 16 were from semi-structured interviews. That means an unstructured interviews. That means I did 16 interviews, and I coded these interviews, or transcript, and then coded part of the interviews where I found institutional statements that they were showing a little bit elements of governance. But the other main data source was websites, since I tried to track all of the actors with the websites, or most of them. Also, I do some clarifications in the paper that is at the moment in process of publication, and is if you see, for example, in corporations there is nothing, or in cultural impactors there is nothing, that is not that I did not look for them, but I looked for them and I didn't find anything that seems like formal or informal rule that could give me some clarity about the governance approach. So that's something that is important to clarify. And with respect to the rest of the database, so the composition, we find also support organizations the majority of actors, and you will see it in a moment to whom, because in this ecosystem is basically everything allocated in one main actor, and this actor at the end actually shape a lot or give a lot of idea of the governance model. I will come to that in a moment. But yeah, so what happened with the data set? I got 239 constitutive statements. I got 49 regulative statements for a total of 288 total statements. And this for me means a lot, because we know from the characteristics of constitutive and regulative that they mean something. That means that why do we have constitutive statements? We have them because they establish some roles, no? They establish some objectives from the actors. It means that many of the statements that I found were into direction to roles that many of the actors of the ecosystem play, and the people in the interviews, they acknowledge this, the websites, they acknowledge these things, and less into regulative statements, but they have some regulations, of course, because there are some rules. Maybe if they would have a policy, it would be a little bit more balanced, or it would be a little bit different. That's my interpretation from that. So how does it look in numbers of statements? Basically, from semi-structured interviews, I got almost 70% of the statements. And that, of course, is come to topics in institutional grammar that are very frequent, and it's like how to code interviews, because the people don't speak in institutional statements. So that was, of course, very challenging. I had to do at a certain level some reconstruction of the statements, and I tried to keep at least the essence, the semantics of the statements, but in some other ones, of course, I was getting the idea and trying to put it in the most close form, so we could track the value of the formal or informal rules that they were presenting, mostly informal in this case. In the websites, it was a little bit more structured, and those were 24% of the statements. The rest ones were less significant. But yeah, so there was a lot of work, I would say, in the, let's say, creation and the composition of the data set. Yeah, since the institutional grammar requires this rigorosity for get the results. This is one of the first results with respect to the analysis of rules typologies that I want to present, and is the classification. And I got, in this case, a lot of position rules, which kind of makes sense for me, because if we think about it, the constitutive statements establish a lot of position rules, since they establish usually which position do you play in the action situation. So kind of makes sense for me that we found a lot of, or these correlations between both of them. But there were also interesting in this respect choice and boundary rules. These boundary rules establish rules for enter into the ecosystem, roles to play the game in the ecosystem, to participate within the programs of the ecosystems, to get the benefits of the ecosystem. And they are very important, of course, for the startups and entrepreneurs, which they are in the center of the ecosystem. And some choice rules, they were also relevant there in the ecosystems. The other ones, they were not so much relevant. I just wanted to emphasize a few of them. Okay. So now there's two analyses, the analysis of constitutive statements and then the analysis of regulative statements. For this one, I got Campus Founders as the main entity that was able to appear as showing a 44% of statements, of the statements. And since we had around 239, it means that around 100 statements have something to do with Campus Founders establishing roles for them. Why? Because they have presented themselves as the hub of entrepreneurship in the city, and they have agglomerated an accelerator, an incubator, a venture studio, a co-working space. They have the mentors, they have the investors. So this is a very special case. If we would do an analysis of this one in other ecosystem, probably it would look a bit different, because these things, you might find them in other regions spread in different places. So this is giving a lot of information already about the governance approach that I will present in a moment. But TUM appear also there. TUM is the Technische Universität Munich, and they play also a very important role interacting actually with campus founders through students, through education, through programs for entrepreneurs as well. EPI is the center of artificial intelligence since the region is very much strong in startups and technology, and the EPI is this also a very important center after campus founders. I would say they are the second ones that are very important. But the Dieter Schwarz Foundation appeared also as well, and this is another actor that you will see it in the results at the end. And it's like this actor is a foundation that is non-profitable foundation, but they put a lot of money in the region. That's the other second characteristic, very interesting from the case of Heilbronn, and is how important is the kind of invisible but also visible role that Dieter Schwarz play, because they finance a lot of institutions, they finance campus founders, they finance EPI, they finance partially TUM as well, they finance other programs in the city. So this is also very interesting. The thing is, they don't want to appear too much in documents, in written documents. They don't want that the people know that they are behind. But somehow the people were able to track them. And in the interviews, the people were able to say, yes, Dieter Schwarz is so relevant and they do this, they do this, they play this role. So they were able to be tracked there. Good. From the constitutive statements, I basically did two analyses. So it was the analysis of entities and the analysis of functions. And in functions, I use a strategy grouping the functions. So I took the verbs and I grouped them into thematics. And these thematics gave me basically two that they were the most representative and were support and enablement that basically cover functions like support, assist, help, facilitate. So these verbs that I found in the statements of the constitutive rules that I found: orchestrate, organize, initiate, with a 17%, with a 38%, sorry, and innovation and development with a 17%, creating, designing, incubating, accelerating, and so on. So this is also interesting because since campus founders agglomerate these things and they have the incubation, they have the acceleration, they orchestrate somehow, they help, they facilitate, most of these verbs or functions, they were related to campus founders. So that gave me already a lot of ideas about the governance model for constitutive statements. I classified them at the end for constitutive statements, regulative statements, and which governance approach was the closest one and why. You will see it at the end. For the analysis of regulative statements, I found that the founders, startups, or entrepreneurs, they are the most attribute that is regulated. That was very interesting because in theory, the ecosystems, they work for facilitate the things for the startups and the entrepreneurs, but also this shows kind of these interesting discussions that we have sometimes in economics, and is the government or these rules helping or constraining the actors? In this case, the attributes that we have from the regulative approach. So I don't know, but they are very highly regulated because they have a lot of rules that they have to accomplish if they want to participate, if they want to appear in the game, if they want to get benefits in the game of the ecosystem, and therefore it's kind of logic that they appear. But yeah, so this was very interesting for me that I found it. Campus founders, they had also a lot of rules that they are forced to do, since it's like they have rules in the two directions. They establish rules and compromises. Sorry, my computer. They establish compromises with founders and startups mainly, but they have also some responsibilities with them, and these rules are going in the two directions. Researchers appears there to be important because there are some universities in the region. Therefore, also the students appear there. And these two attributes, in this case, students and researchers, they are somehow the next generation of the ecosystem, and therefore the ecosystem regulate them a lot if they want to participate in entrepreneurial activities, in trainings, getting access to benefits for be in the future startups and develop their abilities to be entrepreneurs in the future. So that was interesting somehow. In the regulative statements, I also decided to do a strategy of aggregating, and I aggruppated in high obligation, medium obligations, permissions, and prohibitions. In this respect, the most important ones were high obligations and medium obligations, and despite, remember, the percentages regulative, they were not so representative, but even this small, let's say, percentage of statements that they were regulative, they are highly and medium regulated. So it means that they have a lot of enforcement about what kind of expectations they establish to these attributes to the founders in this case. And you probably would understand that if you see what kind of things they have to do, because most of the benefits that they can get are attached to obligations that they have to do. They have many milestones and they have to accomplish these milestones in order to get money, in order to get promotion, in order to get visibility, in order to attend to events for investors, to rounds of business. Therefore, it's so important for them, and they perceive this. Most of them, they came from interviews. They perceive these obligations as a very high level. And with the aims, that was the last element that I include in the analysis of regulative statements. It was kind of a spread within these four categories. I would say compliance and regulation. So adhere, aligns, comply, mainly to founders, execution and completion. So complete, fulfill, submit. Many things are in this respect to founders. Participation and engagement. Yes, because you will see that I add something at the very end. I will show it just in the next slide as a complementary for institutional grammar. And the ecosystem has a spirit of serendipity, which is basically collaborate, cooperate together, talk each other, interact each other, and they perceive many rules or aims of the rules in this respect, and support and contribute. That's also a little bit in the spirit of serendipity that one can see in the ecosystem. This was an extra analysis that I did. Since we know the limitations of institutional grammar, and it's important always to acknowledge. So that was one of the main topics of conversations also in discussions with my supervisor. And it was like, yes, the grammar is valuable. You can get a lot of information, but there are things that you don't catch with the grammar. How can we catch these things? So it comes to the idea, why don't we mix it with some qualitative analysis using thematics, and then that's what I did to complement. And I think the complement worked very well, actually, since I was able to capture the serendipity culture through this analysis of qualitative statements. So basically, I also track in the transcripts these topics. The people are acknowledged in the topics campus founders as a lead orchestrator, support in community building, and Dieter Schwarz, they acknowledge it very much as well as a strategic founder and visionary, since they put, as I said, a lot of money in the region. This is the results that I got. So constitutive statements, the main findings were into direction of campus founders as predominates as a constitutive statement, with support and coordination functions dominate. That was more into direction to the governance approaches in lead organization governance. With respect to regulative formal rules, target founders and startups, high obligations, guidance over cohesion. This is also characteristics that one can see in lead organization governance. In rules typologies, this position rules is also about lead organization, but the fact that we have limited boundaries and choice rules, structured participation, give some minor elements of polycentricity, a little bit of this, who established the boundaries, who established the constraints, and so on. And from the last part, that was the qualitative insights, I would say as a micro level, meso level, and macro level, it was basically confirming a lead organization with respect to serendipity culture that's related to lead organization governance model. the fact of campus founders as orchestrator give campus founders, of course, also some governance approach into direction of lead organization in the ecosystem. So orchestrator, lead company there. And the role of DTFR, since they are a non-governmental organizations and for them it's hard to interact. Actually, they don't interact, but they put the money. So it's like they interact indirectly. They have a strategic layer of governance a little bit in polycentricity since they establish some rules there, but they don't interact so directly. With this one, I finished the presentation. So it's like, what is the contribution of this research? It's a novel application of institutional grammar to understand entrepreneurial ecosystem governance. And the conclusion that I got, which actually I was expecting to get either polycentricity or either one of the types of the network governance, it was a hybrid. And it shows also the complexity of the social sciences since they are sometimes like in between, because we have very diverse topics and the people are also very diverse. The structures are very diverse, very complex. So it's arrived to a hybrid governance of lead organizations with some polycentricity elements. And as recommendations, then I said, okay, I would suggest a policy to create more clear roles, strengthen commitment, and improve coordination. But also, since campus founders plays this indirectly role of orchestrator to support at least this role that is not defined by any policy, is not defined by any formal law or something, but some of the actors to support him since he's basically one of the key actors that is interested in the ecosystem. Other actors, they were basically just there in the region, but they were doing nothing. And encourage startups to contribute to ecosystem buildings, not only as a recipient, but also as an active shapers. That's also interesting, and it's also a call from the people in the ecosystems that they want that. As a future research and how can eventually pursue or continue the applications for institutional grammar, I think a comparative with a regional analysis with diverse ecosystems using institutional grammar could be interesting to see how different the compositions of formal and informal rule would be. And if we are analyzing of course, governance, how the governance approach would look in other ecosystem. I would say for analysis of big ecosystems, it's going to be hard because there are a lot of rules that you might find and then you might collapse. But in a small ecosystem, it might be able to capture institutional grammar, the institutional arrangements that the ecosystem has. And eventually also do some longitudinal studies on governance of the evolution of Heilbronn. That would be interesting since the ecosystem is relatively young. So one could track maybe in 5-10 years if the compositions of the rules, they look the same, or if they have evolved. If they, for instance, have developed a rule, how this rule change, or a policy. A policy, how this policy changed the percentages of the compositions of formal and informal rules. I think that would be also very interesting to see how the ecosystem evolved with respect to the compositions. Governance matters more than we think. And thank you very much for your time for this presentation. And yeah, thank you.